Welcome to Israel. Why is the Middle East important? We Christians are the Notzrim, according to most Jews today. We are the watchers on the wall. Our purpose as members of the Commonwealth of Israel is to serve and protect God's people. After the formation of the world, God enacted a plan, and that plan began in the Middle East at the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And that plan concludes in that same place. The context of the entirety of God's plan begins and completes in and with Israel. There is no denying that, nor refuting it if you are a Jew or a Christian, and the anthropological evidence verifies it. For the purposes of this podcast, Israel is both a nation and a people. Welcome back, friends. This is Jeff Pelletier, and this is Israel. Why is the Middle East important? And I'm here with Neil Johnson, my friend and partner, as we help you understand the answer to that question. So today, folks, we are going to talk about the image of God. But before we get to the image of God, we're going to talk about why God takes care of Israel, how God is the keeper, that's K-E-E-P-E-R. And Neil, what's the Hebrew word for that?
Shomer.
Shomer.
Hashomer. Israel.
The keeper.
The watcher, the guardian, the protector of Israel.
Israel, right. And Genesis 15 kind of kicks this off. And let's see, Genesis is at the beginning of the book, so it's kind of pretty soon, right, in the history of Israel.
You know, Jeff, you're so adept at that. You can either find Genesis because it's the first or Revelation because it's the last, right? It's just that quick. Wow,
test me again. Yeah. Go ahead, give me another one.
All right, I'm afraid to.
Genesis 15:18.
Yeah. On
that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I have given this land. So right away, early on in their history, this was done. God did this with Abram. Okay, so that's an indicator that it's important that God is overseeing them because He gave them that land.
Right.
So what else? What's another reason why do we know that God has looked out on Israel and been its guardian and protector and watchman?
Well, just to, I would like to follow up with that quickly with you because you said that somebody had approached you before and said, well, I'm one of the descendants of Abraham,
yes.
And so they are, but God specifically lays it out that it's to his offspring, his Hebrew offspring through
yes.
Isaac and then through Jacob. So the first time he mentions it is in Genesis, first time to Abraham, I'm giving you this land, and this land is the land of Israel. But then he repeats it to a specific lineage. So it's not just any offspring of Abraham. It is a specific lineage of Abraham, the Jewish people.
That's right, it is. So archaeology helps make the case for this.
Right.
And how is that?
Well, so in Israel, you'll find that there are many departments, groups that are charged with archaeological finds. That is huge in Israel. If you go there, you can volunteer for a dig or any number of things. What's important for knowing that is that Israel constantly strives to be archaeologically aware. One of the things that they do is dig, and the further they dig and the deeper they dig, they keep pulling out verification of the Bible on the one hand, but also the continual Hebrew presence in the land.
So the surprise of the digs isn't that they're finding it was all a big hoax.
Right.
That it never really happened.
Right.
That it's a bunch of hooey. Right. The more they dig, the more it verifies the Bible.
The more it verifies the Bible and the longevity of the Hebrews in that land. So it does both. And that's what our whole purpose is showing that, in fact, the Bible is accurate, that it's the Jewish land, it's the Israelite land, the Hebrew land.
Yep.
And that's what archaeologically it does as well. Contrast and compare this with Israel's enemies, who
the
have
Palestinian Authority Hamas,
who have no archaeological departments at all, They're not interested in any archaeological finds, past connections to the land. Their mantra simply is the Israelites were never here. That's their official version. They were never here. There were no Israelites here. And that is especially as it pertains to the Temple Mount. So there can be no archaeological digs or finds or research done on top of the Temple Mount. The Muslims do not allow it.
Wow.
So,
and why would they allow it?
Well, because again, if you go back and you start finding things that verify that the Jews were, in fact, on the Temple Mount and in the land and in the Holy City, it verifies what they cannot accept, which is the Bible's historicity is correct. The Jews have always been there. Yeah. There was a temple there on the Temple Mount, belonged to Israel.
Wow. Okay. So the last case is the idea of their military experience, and particularly in the early days when they had nary a rifle.
Right. Correct. That's correct. That was back in 1948. Militarily, after that conquest in 48. The constant assault, I should say, once they declared themselves a nation, they were attacked by 5 Arab armies. And as you said, Israel had no right to survive, no right to succeed.
And the odds were very much against them.
Astronomically against them. Yep. And yet, every flare-up that we have seen since 1948, Israel not only succeeds, they're still there against all odds, but they also gain much greater territory.
Much more land.
Much more land.
And that's an amazing thing. And they're not doing it for the land.
Right.
They're doing it to protect themselves and survive.
That's correct.
But they wind up with more land.
They wind up with more land, and that becomes a whole other issue that we touched on briefly in the past as well, is what is the Holy Land? Well, many people who are aware will look at Israel and say, well, I know what Israel looks like. That's Israel west of the Jordan River. Well, God, in a number of places in the scriptures, the Bible talks about the land being much, much larger. And under Solomon and King David, the United Empire, it's called, the United Monarchy, Israel was a much greater, much larger version of present-day modern Israel. But you're right, Jeff, they don't want it only because at this point, there's no way they can administrate all that land.
So in Deuteronomy 11, which is when they're getting ready to go into the Promised Land, and Moses kind of has his final say, kind of laying it out for them, the second law, as it were, restates the Torah. It says in 11:12, it says, Deuteronomy 11:12, it says, "It is a land for which the Lord your God cares for." This is Moses now. "The eyes of the Lord are always on it," not you, just you, but it, "from the beginning to the end of the year." And that means always.
Always.
In every situation.
Right.
So God cares for, and he takes care of that land personally. It's a personal matter to God.
Right.
Yeah.
Correct. And that's why a lot of times he'll say they're referring to Israel's enemies. They're not rioting, they're not raging, they're not going against you militarily, they're going against me, because it is his objective to have the land be cared for by him personally.
And it's our intent on this podcast, on this broadcast. It's our intent to say that that Israel is important, and we're answering the question, why is that so? And one of the main reasons we've made over and over and over, and we keep making over and over and over, is that God cares for that land, and God gave them that land for eternity, as an eternal possession. He gave them that land. And folks, if you're a Christian and if that doesn't click with you, it's a problem. It's a big deal, because God is the same God of the New Testament is the same God in the Old Testament. And if you're not aligned with that as a Christian, if you're not aligned with that, you're not aligned with God.
Correct. That's correct.
We've made that point a lot of times, but we're not going to stop making it.
I don't think we can overemphasize that point. That we've had 2,000 years of confusion at best to say, hey, the Bible's very clear. The land belongs to Israel, a specific people group, a specific type. And if you are against that in any way, intellectually or otherwise, you are against God's purpose and plans.
Yes.
Right.
Well, and if you're against his plan, you're against him.
Right.
And I wouldn't want to be that.
Right.
I wouldn't want to be answering for that.
That's correct.
When I pass on. Okay. So Neil, we know that God created the earth and he created the land and he gave it that's land and he gave it to them. But we also know that God created us.
Right.
Now we're going to go into a discussion about something that's intrigued me for a long time, and I really think it's important from a theological perspective. And again, we're not theologians; we just like to talk about it. If you're a theologian, please go to our Facebook page, Israel, Why is the Middle East Important? And drop us a note. We'd love to hear from you. I think it's great. Or you can email us at whyisthemiddleeastimportant@gmail.com and just help us out here because we're interested. If you hear anything we say and you disagree, hey, let's talk about it because we might have you on the show. You never know. Okay, so mankind was created, Neil, it says, in the image and likeness of God. It says, it says right in Genesis, in chapter 1, male and female, he created them in the likeness and the image of God. Two different things, the likeness and image, but not two exactly different things, are they?
Right. They're not exactly different, but they are different, and the difference is determinative. Mm-hmm. It is important. Mm-hmm. So one is, we'll make man in our image according to our likeness. That's the way one reads. Yeah. Now, it's important to say that according to our likeness means according to our likeness. Mm-hmm. So if we read in Scripture, and we will read some of these verses, God looked like a man. So we have those attributes. Man and women look like God in form and possess his attributes. Jeff, just as an aside, there's no way we'd ever have love and concern and compassion if all we were is an amoeba that grew out of the muck some kind of way.
Wait. So you're saying because God is like that,
right,
and he created us in his image, we're like that.
We have his attributes because he made us in his image and likeness. So the likeness is, as we'll see in some of these other verses, he looks like a man. We know that. Mm-hmm. People who've had after-death experiences and near-death experiences have come back and said, I could see a form and it looked familiar, right? It looked like a man. But the attributes, the idea of God, when he breathed into man, he breathed into him life, it says, in different ways of what that word means, life. But he breathed into him sentient consciousness. In other words, he breathed into him God's own attributes. A dog might be faithful, but a dog doesn't think and wonder, geez, should I go here or there today? Should I go to work or call in sick? Should I do... These are all things that are above a dog's, use any animal, thinking process, but man contemplates these kind of issues. These are attributes of God. They think about things, and they think about things deeply.
Isn't that why, I forget, in the Psalms somewhere, maybe you can remember, where it refers to us as small g gods?
Right.
And even Jesus makes a reference to that.
Right.
Well, do you remember where that's at? What is that about?
Yeah, he's referring back, when Jesus always referred back to the Psalms, or the Tanakh, as it's called, the Torah, for his legitimacy, for his authority. So he always referred back, and one of the things he
Wait, that's because the New Testament didn't exist yet.
That's because the New Testament didn't exist yet.
Who knew?
And he was going out of his way for us not to be confused, even though, let's face it, Jeff, you said we're not theologians. Okay, I can agree with you, but we've had 2,000 plus years now of total confusion where people, not necessarily for nefarious reasons, but want to understand, how can this be? How can my present circumstances indicate God? So sometimes it was legitimate, but nonetheless, we've had 2,000 years to muck up the plain and simple reading of, hey, Jews are important, Israel's important, the land is important. God used the Torah, the Tanakh, for his authority. And he did say at one place, he said, I think it might be Psalms 2, where it says, how did the Lord say unto my Lord, you are God's? Well, and Jesus went on to expound that and explain that. And if you just read it for the first time, you might not even see those things in it. But that was a common kind of parsing out that Jesus and other rabbis would have done in his day, would have parsed out that whole idea of you're God's, in the sense of you're not God, but you do have his attributes.
Attributes, right? You attributes. And that's so powerful to me, Neil. And then, but it says in the image and likeness. So we are like God, but we also are made in his image. And the word image is pictorial, is it not? It's similar in appearance.
It is.
Right?
That's
and
exactly
that says
right.
that God, and Jesus is a great example. So maybe Jesus coming as a human wasn't for our benefit. Maybe he came that way because that's what he looks like. I mean, that's who he is.
Well, there's seemingly no doubt that, as we will get into, that many times people saw natural humans in the Old and New Testament, and they were actually celestial created beings.
Yes.
Also, people have had visions of God, and he had the form of a man still. It wasn't something strange.
Well, when Jacob wrestled with the angel, he wrestled with God.
He wrestled with God.
Who was in the form of a man.
Who was in the form of a man. It was only after he wrestled with him did Jacob, who the man renames Jacob to Israel.
Yes.
Now you only can name something that you are in charge of. You are greater than. In other words, if you name your pet, whatever you name your pet, whatever pet you have, well, you are in charge of that pet.
Yes.
You are greater than that pet.
Yes.
You've named that pet.
You're the steward of the pet.
That's exactly right. And so it occurred to Jacob after the fact, to Israel after the fact, that he even named the location where that wrestling match occurred, Peniel, and that's, I saw the face of God. Wow. And there are other versions of that. The first time that I remember reading it was when Abraham was sitting by the oaks of Mamre, it says, and Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And Abraham brought food and stood by them as they ate, and talked with them and walked with them as they walked toward Sodom. Well, these men ate, they looked like men, and they walked. So you have to ask yourself, wow, that's awful strange. And so we'll read others as well. But yeah, so far we've got Abraham saw 3 men. We've got Jacob wrestled with a man. We've got, and there's more, but we have Joshua was near Jericho. He looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Not in his wings, not a sword coming out of his mouth. He had a hand. He had a drawn sword in his hand, and Joshua approached him and asked, now you don't approach some strange creature. I can guarantee you if you saw a strange creature, you wouldn't approach it. Joshua walked up to this man and asked him, are you for us or our enemies? He wanted to know, who is this guy? And this angelic being, as it turns out, replied, neither. I've come as the commander of the Lord's army. So in other words, he looked reasonable. He looked like something you would expect. It didn't freak him out, right? He walked up to it, and the response back was, who are you for, us or our enemies? And the response back was, neither. I'm here as the commander of the Lord's army. So again, you have this idea of a man. He had a hand. So this is very important to realize, that these created angelic beings in the form of God have a form that's similar, at least somewhat like a man's.
So the standards or the flags of the tribes of Israel, Judah, Ephraim, Reuben, and Dan,
right,
represented, and there's pictures on each of them, and these are pictures.
Right.
How do these pictures come into existence?
Right. So they came into existence different ways, but each tribe, each of the 12 tribes had their own banners, but around the tabernacle in the wilderness, they were arrayed under the lead tribes, the lead banners, if you will, of, as you said, Judah and Ephraim, Reuben. Each one would have had their own standard. But the standard for Judah, Ephraim, Reuben, and Dan were respectively a lion. Well, Jesus says he comes back as the Lion of the tribe of Judah.
Oh, there you go.
Ephraim was an ox. There's all kinds of parallelisms you can make with all these, of course. Reuben was a man.
A man.
And Dan was an eagle. And so if you go from there and say, okay, those were the standards around the tabernacle in the wilderness, and the tabernacle was definitely a protective environment, as we've said before. You know, the people didn't get old, clothes didn't wear out, poisonous serpents didn't bite them. They always had food. It was a very protective environment. But Ezekiel, he has a vision one time, and he sees the other realms, and he said, in the center, this is Ezekiel, in the center...
Wait. Before, where was that text? The one with the banners. What text was that from?
Well, you can see where they stand, where they are arrayed around the tabernacle in Numbers. I think it's Numbers 20, I believe.
Okay, and now we're talking about Ezekiel.
And now we're talking about Ezekiel because it kind of goes with the same idea.
With the same text. And we've also made the case that the Bible repeats itself for a reason.
For a reason. So if you go to Ezekiel and now you say, okay, this rabbinic tradition has always ascribed these tribes with banners, right? So, and we know that Judah, Jesus said, I am the Lion of the tribe of Judah, and so on. So we can see where those things come. But Ezekiel's vision, it says he, in the center was the form of living creatures. They had a human form. They had human hands. All four living creatures had faces. Well, again, Jeff, hands and faces and human form, it's a picture of a man.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
Right.
So all of these things, and so if you say, okay, Ezekiel had a vision of these living creatures, well, that is definitely going to model when we get to it, Revelation, when John gets caught up in his vision, and he describes, I saw these living creatures, and he describes them the same way. The form on their faces was that of a man. This is Ezekiel. And each of the four had the face of a lion on the right side, the face of an ox on the left side, and also the face of an eagle. Okay, so they had a human hands and face, all of this sort of thing. But if you're looking at a person, so if I'm looking at you standing and you're facing north to south, the right side would be the east and the left side would be the west.
Sure.
Okay, the lion was to the east and the ox was to the west, just as the banners are positioned around the tabernacle.
Wow.
So again, we have this, it's not just by happenstance, it's not just a one-off occurrence that we talk about or you read about. Ezekiel saw this thing, and if he was standing in a north-south position, and he said the right side of him was this lion, and that would be to the east, and Judah was always around the tabernacle to the east. The ox was Ephraim, basically with the other tribes assigned to him, and that would be to the west, just again as the banners are positioned around the tabernacle. So it wasn't just a one-off statement, it was just exactly as we read Scripture.
So we've talked about the fact that God looks over Israel. He created Israel, He gave them the land, and He made us in His image.
Correct.
Okay, in His image and His likeness. So we are His likeness by the fact that we have his attributes.
Right.
And we are made in his image because we look similar to him. And what you have said to me, and what I'm listening to you say is, God had a face, right? We have a face. God has hands. We talk about the hand of God, right, in the scriptures all the time. We have hands. God walked with Abraham. Right. Abraham walked with God. God walked with them in the cool of the day in the garden.
Right.
I mean, we are made in the image of God.
Right. And so you can say it's more than just metaphor. It's more than just when God says, with a mighty outstretched arm I brought them out of Egypt. Mm-hmm. Well, it's seemingly he has at least something that's very close to looking like human form. He had an arm. He has a hand. All of these things. In other words, Jeff, in the New Testament, it says in Hebrews 13, for instance, it says, "Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers. Mm-hmm. For by doing so, some people have entertained angels without knowing it." Now, the only way you could entertain an angel without knowing it is if they looked familiar, right? Mm-hmm. Because if one were to see a four-faced creature of any kind, I guarantee you, Jeff, you'd know I saw a four-faced creature of some, and it didn't look like something familiar. And yet in Hebrews it says, by doing so, by entertaining strangers, some have entertained angels and they didn't even know it. Mm. So again, that just...
So what I'm getting out of this, Neil, and I think it's important, I don't think we're anthropomorphizing God. We're not saying God is like a man.
Right.
We're saying man is like God.
That's right. That's exactly
right. It's a whole different point of view.
That is a whole different point of view, and that's a good word, the anthropomorphizing of God.
Yeah.
It's like he does have a form. He's not just this vaporous nothing that's just a midst of floating nothingness. Mm-hmm. He has a form. Mm-hmm. And the form seemingly is just like man's form.
Yeah, we are in his image.
We are in
his image.
And
his likeness.
That's
so
correct.
we're not saying he's like us. We're saying we're like him.
We're like him, right.
Okay. So go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to jump ahead to our next example, which is in Revelation. John says...
Wait a minute. Yeah. You're using the whole Bible here.
I'm using the whole Bible. And it's all consistent, isn't it? So we have this tabernacle experience from Numbers, I think it's 20, where it talks about where the tribes are placed around the tabernacle. We see Ezekiel's vision, but now we're in the New Testament, and the last book of the Bible, Revelation, which you're so quick at, you were able to say, I can find the first and the last, right? John gets caught up, and he said he's freaked out. First of all, you have to remember, when you read that book of Revelation, you have to remember John is absolutely freaked out at what he's seeing. And he is saying, in the center, around the throne, this is chapter 4, by the way, 6 and 7. In the center, around the throne, were 4 living creatures. That's exactly what Ezekiel called them. Living creatures. Living creatures. That no other way to describe them. Nothing I'm familiar with, something very strange. The first living creature was like a lion. In other words, it had the face of a lion. The second, like a calf or an ox. The third had a face like a man. And the fourth was like an eagle in flight. And that's exactly what the banners represented around the tabernacle in the wilderness. So all the same, nothing different.
Wow.
There it's tied in a bow, if you will, that the last book of the Bible is just like, the beginning book of the Bible. There's no difference at all in these descriptions.
Now, Neil, there's a couple of passages in the Bible, maybe more than a couple, but there's at least 2 that I'm aware of where we get to learn the attributes of God, the likeness, how we're like Him. One of them is in 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient, love is kind, love is does not keep a record of wrongs, and so forth, and it just goes on and on. Another one is the fruit of the Spirit, okay? If we walk in the Spirit, we don't gratify the flesh anymore. We have love, joy, peace, and those are the attributes of God as well, similar. But then there's Philippians 4. Philippians 4:18 is where kind of Paul gives us a word there in a passage. He gives us a word, an understanding, a message, a little sermon, if you like, that helps us to develop the likeness of God in us. And what is that?
Right. And before I forget, and I'll read that, Philippians 4, just to your point, Jeff, yes, indeed, God develops and explains what his attributes are for, first of all, the Jewish people, but also for all the non-Jews that came in the New Testament. He explains what the difference were. And as Paul says sometimes, as some of you once did, or some of you once were like. In other words, doing things that didn't follow or weren't attributes of God. But by the time we get to Philippians 4, it says, and this is important because we'll tie this together, but whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of a good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things.
Yeah.
And that's important because for our listeners, and what we, at least I and you, hear so often is people are afraid today. The world is going through major changes.
Quickly,
very quickly.
Very quickly.
And if we say, wait a minute, God made us in his image. God made certain promises to Israel. Israel is front and center in our day. God is the Shomer Yisrael. He is the watchman, the keeper, the guardian, the protector. If all of that is true, then I have to start thinking on things that also keep me thinking what's true, as opposed to going off, what I call going off the deep end, being influenced by TV or the culture and being negative. And it is what we did a show on called It's a Battle for Our Mind.
Yes, we did.
Whatever I think.
We did more than one show on it.
Right.
Yeah.
Whatever I think whatever I think on, I am.
I am.
And so this is very important, but
There's
why...
there's a proverb that says, whatsoever a man thinketh in his heart, in the King James, so is he.
So is he, right.
And that's a person, of course, not just a man.
Right.
But yeah.
I think a lot of these adages have come down from biblical referent originally, but if you say, why do you start out with whatever things are true? Then why do you go to honest and just and pure and lovely and of a good report? Well, why the order is because whatever is true, something can be true, but not everything that's true is either honest, right?
Right.
It can be, I can give you a truth.
Be evil truth.
Right. But it's not honest.
Right.
It's certainly not just or pure or lovely or of a good report just because it's true. It can be very frightening. It can be incapacitating. It can be negative. So that means that while we are aware of many things, in other words, we're not putting our head in the sand or saying, just wait for God to come and you'll be okay and hunker down and go live by yourself. No, but it's a battle for your mind. So while we're aware of many of these things, we must battle not to dwell on the negativity of any of them. And that's what Paul was saying in this verse in Philippians. Think on these things. Go to battle. You're in a fight. Go to battle and dwell on these things specifically. Dwelling on what is honorable, just, pure, and of a good report. We have to demonstratively, objectively, forcefully say, I am going to dwell on those things. I am not going to dwell on the negativity, because the negativity from an event that may be true is demonic, and it will incapacitate you. And that is a battle for our minds. Say, whatever is just, pure, true, lovely, and of a good report, and those things only will I dwell on.
Stay tuned for a special Hebrew blessing at the end of every episode, including this one. This has been a great discussion. I look forward to how it continues to unfold. As you can tell, Neil and I enjoy talking about the subject as it helps us to get to the root of the matter about God and why Israel and the Middle East are so important. Thank you for listening to this podcast, and we would love to hear from you. Visit us at our home at podbean.com. Israel, why is the Middle East important? That's podbean.com. Israel, why is the Middle East important? And you can find us any place great podcasts can be found. And you can find us on Facebook using the same title. And you can email us at whyisthemiddleeastimportant@gmail.com. That's whyisthemiddleeastimportant@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And if you like what you hear, please invite your friends to the conversation. You know, one thing Neil and I always say to each other is, I don't know, because it is by having an opinion, yet holding it with an open hand, that we continue to grow. Shalom. See you next time. Wait for the blessing.
Shalom.